What's up, everyone? My name is Pastor Brandon, and I'm so happy you're joining us today. If it's your first time with us, I certainly hope it's not your last time with us, because here at New Post Church, we lead people to love God, love people, and to make a difference. We do that by creating a church that is for the Fredericksburg region. We support local schools, women's centers, homeless shelters, and food banks to make a difference in our community. Now, let's jump into this week's message. So we're in a series right now titled Relational Vampires, and you know who these people are. Because remember, vampires, what do vampires do? Vampires suck your blood. Relational vampires suck the life right out of you. And you know who these people are. These are the needy people. These are the controlling or manipulative people. These are the critical people. These are the hypocritical people. And we're starting this series, or we've been in this series during this season, because holidays are just around the corner, ladies and gentlemen. And we have to understand that we're going to interact with a bunch of these people that we may not like to interact with, or a bunch of these people that cause us stress and anxiety that we don't want to spend any time around, but they simply are there. Or they're like what I like to say, they're extra grace required, right? They suck the life out of you, and it requires a little extra grace. So we're taking a look in this series of how do we behave and how do we handle and love these people. Not how do we deal with or tolerate, right? I mean, we're not called as Christians to deal with or tolerate. And if you're here today and you're not a Christian, then I would encourage you to kind of set that attitude of tolerance aside and adopt an attitude of love and care, even if you're not a Christian, because that's just a better way to live, and it's going to create a better society for everybody. So, but as a Christian, we don't want to have an attitude or position of tolerance. We want to have an attitude and position of love and care for those around us. And it causes us to remember that God's greatest commandment is to love God and to love people. And that love people part is the hardest, especially when they're needy, critical, controlling, or hypocrites, right? I mean, it's just those are the hardest times and the hardest things to deal with. Now, this is something that the topic today is something that it's something we're all familiar with. It's something that we're all familiar with. It's something that we're all connected with, something we're all going to experience. Unfortunately, you will or have, or maybe have right now, or maybe on the way to church, or maybe on Friday before you close down at the office, dealt or going to deal with critical people. Critical people. Now, how many of you know somebody who has the spiritual gift of fault finding or critical attitude? And if you just leaned over and you just told somebody 3 things that you don't like about online church, you might be that critical person. You know these people. This is the boss that micromanage and only provides feedback when something is wrong. That he micromanages everything, never gives you encouragement, never builds you up or coaches the team along. The only time you ever hear from him is when something is incredibly wrong. You know these parents, your parents, as an adult, maybe your parents, they still criticize you. They criticize how you raise your kids. They criticize how you spend your money. Maybe it's as an adult, you deal with some of these people that go, oh, you go to one of those new hip churches where they have lights and music, and they don't really care about people in those places, and they don't really, right? But you deal with critics like that. Maybe it's your spouse. It's probably not, but maybe it's your spouse, where they get frustrated at the way you chew food, or whether you do or don't start or load the dishwasher. Maybe they're critical of when you leave your clothes on the floor. These are all times and places and moments where we interact with critical people, constantly pointing out the faults. Aristotle said, to avoid criticism, do nothing, say nothing, be nothing. So if you want to avoid criticism, just don't do a thing. Don't do anything. And then you won't be criticized. But you aren't going to make a difference in the world either. His point is that people are going to criticize you, and you're not going to make everyone happy. Your decisions are going to be up and people are going to criticize you. And that's just part of it. It's going to happen. And let's be honest, you can't be responsible for how people behave, but you are responsible 100% of how you behave. What you do, the way you handle things, that is your responsibility. But the question again becomes, how do we determine how to behave? How do we handle somebody who is overly critical? How do we handle somebody that's just seems like they're rude sometimes, or seems like they have it out for us, or they constantly want to press against us and they're just so critical all the time? How do we deal with that? I mean, you've had that. Maybe it's your mother-in-law or your father-in-law. They're so critical of the way you raise your kids. They're so critical of the way that you handle things at work, or that coworker that's so critical of the way that you handle things with your boss, right? I mean, we have these people. So what does it mean as a Christian? How do we manage these relationships, and how do we love them through these relationships? Got a few things. The first thing we have to pay attention to is maybe we just don't respond, okay? When somebody's critical of you, doesn't mean you have to respond. Just because someone criticizes you does not obligate you to respond to them. You do not have to. You don't owe them anything, okay? You don't owe them anything. The author of Proverbs says it this way: a person's wisdom yields patience. It's to one's glory to overlook an offense. This idea of overlooking an offense, the Hebrew words that come together to create this, create an imagery of rising above the situation, rising above the problem, rising above the offense, rising above the criticism. Because here's the thing, a lot of times somebody is critical to us. It feels like an attack on us. They give us criticism. We want to bulk up, get big, yell and scream at them back, or maybe we want to passively, aggressively fire off some shots. You know what I mean? You want to take some stuff for granted there, right? Now, this phrase here that he says to rise above does not mean pretending it didn't happen, okay? It's forgiving in the moment. It's forgiving in real time. It's forgiving and rising above the offense at that moment. Why? Why do we need to do that? Because you don't have time to fight with and argue with people, and you don't need to prove yourself to them. If you're doing the right thing, people are going to criticize you. It's just what it is. It's going to happen. Christians, I hope that you understand this. It's just the way it is. Christians are going to criticize you for the way that you treat others because you're going to be too loving. And they're going to say, you can't love them that much. If you love them that much, they'll never know what they're doing is wrong. That's also not true, because Jesus loved people all the time through every situation. He just said, when you do this, leave this life of sin. So I guess as long as you're behaving that way, you're okay. All right. So the point is that you don't have to respond. You do not have to respond. You don't have time to fight and argue with people. The other thing you might do, another option for us, is to respond carefully. Respond, but maybe we respond carefully. And there will be times when maybe you do need to respond or correct something, but when you do it carefully. Pay attention to the entire situation that's happening. And Paul reminds us of that. Sometimes if your response is going to lead to sin, don't respond, okay? Do not respond. So again, maybe we don't need to respond, maybe we need to respond, but here's the filter. If your response is going to cause you to sin, then you need to take a step back and you probably shouldn't respond. Paul even reminds us that in Ephesians chapter 4. Paul says, in your anger, do not sin. So you're going to get angry when somebody criticizes you. You're going to get angry when they feel like they're attacking your project or attacking your family or attacking your business or attacking your department or whatever it is. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get angry. But in your anger, do not sin. So if you're pressing it through a filter and you realize, oh man, I'm angry, I'm probably going to sin. That's the case. Do not respond. And respond carefully, evaluate it. If responding is going to cause you to sin, don't respond. And you go, well, okay, Brandon, well, what's a sin? Sin is simply this. If you're going to hurt them in any way, verbally, emotionally, maybe physically, right? Don't respond. It's not worth it. The verse continues, says, do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. The second half of this verse is not meant to be taken literally because it's not written literally. What Paul means here is that we should make every effort to be at peace with someone. And that being at peace is far better than living in anger or in tension with someone. That's what happens with critics, right? Critics, they say things, they're rude, they're critical of things, and then there creates a natural tension between you and between them. And Paul tells us, hey, look, if you're going to respond, be very careful how you respond. So if it's going to cause you to sin, don't respond at all. But if you're going to respond, remember, it's important to try to do it to where you guys are going to land at a place of peace. You don't have to agree, but you want to land in a place of peace. And you know that. You know that that's easier to live with somebody, especially if it's somebody in your church, somebody in your family, somebody in your workplace or your business. It's easier to live with that person day in and day out. And also, just be honest, it's easier to love that person day in and day out when you guys have talked about things and there's not that tension there anymore. It opens up, if you don't deal with it, it opens you up to bitterness and hatred towards that, and to hatred towards that individual. And when we deal with a critic, when we deal with critics, and critical people, it's real easy to fire back and want to tear them down. Again, that's the natural response. But all that does is double down on the hurt, and now there's even more pain between the two of you. And it drives a wedge between you and the other person, when maybe that person is a coworker, a family member. You just don't want to do it. So remember what Paul says when he says, slow down, think about it. If it's not going to help or it's going to cause you to sin, don't respond. If you can handle it, respond with the purpose of a peaceful resolution. Don't have to agree, okay? And you've seen this happen real time in marriages before, haven't you? You've seen this happen real time with marriages where there was an issue and there was a problem and the husband or the wife didn't address it. Or maybe they did, and the way they addressed it was very sinfully. And they used words to where they destroyed and tore down one another. And in that way, things were torn apart. Maybe you've seen it at your workplace with your boss, where you've seen the coworker come up and behave poorly to the boss and treat them poorly. And then the whole thing gets blown up and torn apart. You've seen it with your kids. When somebody is responding out of anger, it never ends well. So we've learned so far that, hey, maybe there's situations when I need to make a change, right? I need to maybe not respond at all. Maybe there's situations where I need to respond and I need to respond carefully. I need to acknowledge that, yes, something is incorrect and I need to correct it, or there's some tension here that we need to resolve. I'm going to respond, but I'm going to respond carefully, thoughtfully, not firing off emotionally, not firing off any other way. I'm going to slow down, think about it. Here's the way we are going to handle things. And the last thing, this is the one that you're going to push back on. This is the thing that we're all going to push back on and be like, I don't want that, Brandon. Brandon, I'm not interested in that one. I like the first one, because when you heard don't respond, you heard ignore them. That's not what don't respond means. It just means you don't respond to the criticism. If responding to the criticism is going to cause, and the critical attitude, if that's going to cause you to sin, don't respond to them. Rise above it. Forgive it in the moment. Don't react to it. But this one's going to make you uncomfortable. This one's going to make you the most uncomfortable. There are times when sometimes you need to listen and make a change. Man, nobody likes that one. There's a chance that these critics and these critical people aren't actually critical. They're telling you the truth. If more than a few people have said it, it's probably true. I'll take it a step further. If more than a few people in different areas of your life have said it, then it's true. If your wife says it and then people at work say it, it's true. If somebody in your work circle says it and then somebody in your friend circle says it, it's true. If somebody at your church says it and somebody at work says it, it's true. It's not critical anymore. It's true. And you and I should figure out how we handle those situations. They are simply pointing something out in order to help you. The author of Proverbs says, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge. Discipline in this context means a corrective response. So if you hear this, you love knowledge. because you want to be better. You hear, you're not handling this the right way at work. Okay, thank you for that. You're right, I'm not. 4 people have told you, you're like, yeah, I'm not handling this right at work. I'm controlling. Okay. Well, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge. So you love knowledge, you're going to do that. Okay, good. Got it. But whoever hates correction is stupid. Ouch. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid. Listen to me. There are times when God will use the people around you to correct you. Happens all the time. It happens often to me. God will use people around me to correct me. He'll use people around me to guide me. And I do my best to open it up and recognize that, hey, I need to pay attention. If more than a few people have said it, then I am this way, and I need to start figuring out ways to make it better. And it's rarely just one person or just one family member. It's generally a council of people. Like I said, you'll get it from different angles. Hey, you do this. Hey, I've noticed. It comes down to like your wife looking at you and saying, hey, I've noticed, honey, you drink pretty often. And you're like, yeah, whatever, I don't drink that much. Then your friend at work says, hey, man, I've noticed you kind of drink every night when you come home from work. Yeah, it's not a problem. There's a buddy at church says, hey, man, I noticed when we were over at group the other night, you cracked a beer open, and that's not the first time. You kind of do it every night that I come over to your house. You might have a problem, right? You might have a problem. Or somebody says, hey, man, I've noticed the way that you are reacting to that coworker, the way you're treating them, that's not right. That's not very good. And you go, yeah, you don't know the whole situation, whatever, man. You don't know the whole situation. Then you go home and tell the situation to your wife, and she says, I don't know, man. That's probably, I don't know. Feel like you probably overreacted. Well, I don't overreact. You just don't know the whole situation, right? I mean, if it's coming from multiple angles and coming from a few different people, God generally uses a counsel to correct us. And when that happens, to use his words, don't be stupid, okay? When it's coming from multiple angles and from multiple people and they're providing criticism to you, okay? Don't think of it as criticism. Think of it as loving correction, okay? Loving correction. If you ignore them, if you refuse to hear it, again, Solomon says this, not me, that you are stupid. And it's important to remember as we work through these things with critical people, and it comes to critical people. You know, sometimes we need to respond. Sometimes we don't need to respond. Sometimes we need to recognize that the response needs to happen in us, right? It's important to remember when you're dealing with these critical people, oftentimes they're working through some real hurt. They have confidence issues. They have problems at home. They have problems at work. They've dealt with a bad childhood. Maybe they were emotionally abused as a kid and they're being critical is the only way that they feel like they can be safe. Maybe they've never met a well-adjusted, happy, and production person like that before. And let me be honest, I've never met a well-adjusted, happy, productive, and positive person who constantly bangs out hateful comments on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. I've just never met a healthy, happy, productive person who does that. I've never met a healthy, happy, productive person who takes to the social media and TikTok and makes hateful videos and posts hateful things on Facebook or social media. Like, that's not a well-adjusted, happy, productive person. Typically, that's a person that's dealing with extreme hurt. And behind every anger is a hurt. And if we can remember that, then we can proceed with grace. We can proceed with grace. Because you have no idea what they've been through. You've heard proceed with caution. I say proceed with grace. You have no idea what they have been through. And we are expected as Christ followers to love everyone, not just the easy ones. That we are called to love everyone, not just the easy ones. And just to take a second and reapply it, let's not forget that we can be overly critical too, can't we? I think we can. Sometimes we say things like, can you believe the way she dresses? I mean, come on, she's supposed to be a Christian, and she's coming in wearing that? I mean, come on. Can you believe the way he said? Can you believe what he said? I mean, yeah, I know I don't know the whole context, but can you believe what he said? Can you believe the boss? They are such an idiot. I mean, come on. That's such a dumb move. Oh, man, they're so stupid. The coach. Coach, did you see the call that coach made? Oh, they suck. You know what? They just need to fire him. He's awful. He's terrible. Just get rid of him. He doesn't know what he's doing. And this is what happens when it comes to us when we're critical. We make excuses, right? We make excuses when we're critical. We say things like, look, I'm just being honest. Honesty is not an excuse for hate. Just going to tell you that. Just going to tell you that. Honesty is not an excuse for hate. Honesty is not an excuse to treat people poorly. Or we'll say things like, look, I'm just calling it as I see it, which is another way of saying, I don't care how you feel, and I'm going to say whatever I say, and if you have a problem with it, you're the problem. I'm not going to take any ownership of it. I'm just calling it as I see it. Or, hey, I'm just saying. Like, I ain't saying, I'm just saying. No, you're not just saying. You're being critical too. You're being critical also. You're going out of your way to tear them down, point out the faults, break things down because you are frustrated maybe with the way their life is, or maybe you have some unrecovered or unhandled or unredeemed trauma in your life to some degree. So we simply need to shift our mentality because we can all be critical and we all have moments and situations where we are more critical than others. We need to shift our mentality and start looking for good and believing the best. Looking for good in those around us and believing the best. Now, think back to all the conflicts you've had over the last couple years. Think back to all the times those people were critical of you. Think back to all those times you were critical of other people. How many times could you have avoided that if you started from a position of looking for good and believing the best? How many of those conversations or those moments would have been handled better, would have been taken care of better, or you would have responded better? Let me ask you this. How much better of a husband would you be if you were looking for the good and believing the best? How much better of a wife would you be if you were looking for good and believing the best? What about a parent? Would you be a better parent if you were looking for good and believing the best? How about a boss? If you were the boss of a business or an owner, how much better of a leader would you be if you were looking for the good and believing the best in people? I mean, come on. Your life, and you know how you know as well as I do, your life would be better if you did that. How many more people would you be a positive influence for in their life if you proceeded with grace? Dealing with critical people is tough, and it can be painful. It can be frustrating, but let's not forget that we're critical people too. We make mistakes too. We say things we shouldn't say. We behave ways we shouldn't behave. But if we can get into a habit of proceeding with grace and looking for good and believing the best, then our country would be a better place. Our city, our church would be a better place if we started in that position instead of a position of fighting, arguing, and pressing against it. So let's do that. Let's proceed with grace and look for the good and believe the best. I want to pray with you before we go. Father, thank you for this reminder today. This reminder that we, as Christians, we don't have the right to treat people poorly or to behave poorly because of one thing or another. That we're expected to give the same grace to those around us because it was the grace that you extended to us. And God, help us be individuals that are looking for good and believing the best, instead of simply trying to be critical and believing the worst in people. Lord, we love you. We give you all the praise. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.